Good morning. Today is Thursday, December 14th, 2023. VaYehi miketz shnosayim yomim. And it was at the end of 2 years, Uparo cholem, and Paro had a dream. That's how our Torah portion begins this week, the Parsha miketz, and it was after 2 years. What 2 years? After which 2 years? So it's referring to the end of last week's Torah portion, VaYeishev. At the end of last week's Torah portion, we learned that Yosef was falsely accused by the wife of Potiphar. He was put in prison. And Rashi says that Yosef received a sentence of 10 years in prison. He was supposed to be there for 10 years. But at the end of last week's Torah portion, we learned at the very end that Yosef had interpreted the dreams of Paro's butler and Paro's wine steward, and both of those dreams came to pass. The butler was returned. The butler and the baker. The butler was returned to his office, and Yosef said to him, "Please remember me, that I'm here for no reason. I was falsely accused, and if you get a chance to speak to Paro, try to help me get out." And our sages tell us that that was considered a lapse of faith on the part of Yosef, that he asked the butler to remember him, and he didn't just rely on God to take him out. And because of that, God ordained that he should have to remain in the prison an extra 2 years. So it was supposed to be 10 years, but 2 years were added. So our Parsha says at the end of those added 2 years, and we're going to go on with the story. Now, there is a question which is very, very difficult, and that is, what did Yosef do wrong? I mean, we all know, we've discussed this many times, a person is not allowed to rely on a miracle. A person should not rely only on prayer. A person who's trying to achieve a goal should do whatever physical actions might be helpful. And so what's wrong with asking the butler to mention him to Paro? It seems like part of the strategy that's necessary. Okay, that's a difficult question. We're going to leave that for another time. But in any event, it was 12 years instead of 2 because Yosef showed a lack of faith. And our Parsha is at the end of those added 2 years, then Paro has his dream. Rabbeinu Avram ben Arambam, Rabbi Avraham, the son of Maimonides, writes that these 2 years were not a punishment, they were a blessing. Now, how is that possible? Rabbeinu Yonah, one of the great medieval philosophers, wrote a work called Sharei Teshuvah, The Gates of Repentance. It's a classic work. And in that work he writes, one who truly trusts in God should hope that in the midst of their distress, that the darkness that they are experiencing will be the cause of the upcoming light. As our sages said, if I did not fall, I could not have arisen. If I had not been in darkness, it would not have been light for me. Rav Nachman of Bratslav explains this process. He explains when a person, on a spiritual level, when a person needs to ascend from one level to another, a person needs to rise in spirituality, the person must undergo a descent before the ascent. The descent is for the purpose of the ascent. And when the descent begins, we need to remember that this is a stage in the unfolding process of the ascent. when we are in a descent spiritually, God is saying to us, trust me. You're not just being punished with more time in the dungeon. God says the descent is in order for you to look for me, God says. Look for me harder in order for the descent to be the preparation for the ascent. And so what Rabbi Avram ben Harambam, Rabbi Avram, the son of Maimonides, says, he teaches us that the extra 2 years that Yosef was in prison was not a punishment, but it was the only way that Yosef's ultimate redemption could have happened. Listen to how the story might have played out differently. If the butler had left the prison cell and immediately told Paro, there's an innocent Jew in the prison, he's wrongly accused, as Yosef requested, if that would have happened, what Yosef wanted, that the butler would immediately take his case to Paro, what would have happened? Well, there's no way to know, but the best that could have happened is that Paro would have given Yosef a pardon. But there would have been no reason for any kind of face-to-face meeting between Yosef and Paro. There would be no reason for Yosef to have made any impression on Paro. Instead, the butler forgot Yosef. And it must have seemed to Yosef that God also had forgotten him. But Rabbi Avram is suggesting that this was a necessary step so that when Paro dreamt his dream, because when did he dream these dreams? 2 years later. So 2 years later, all of a sudden, the butler remembers Yosef. Which meant that Yosef could stand before Paro and personally impress the ruler of the world and become his second in command, because he was remembered at the moment when Paro needed him to interpret his dream. Had Yosef come out earlier, there would have been no connection between Yosef and Paro, and Yosef would not have been in a position to interpret Paro's dream. But because Yosef was still in prison for those 2 years, and the moment that he came out was the moment that Paro had those dreams, Yosef was now in the position where he could assume second in command, where he could provide food for the entire empire, as well as, of course, his own family, and reunite with his own family. So, if you look at the life of Yosef, in broad strokes, on a simple level, Yosef's story up until now seems to be the story of God abandoning Yosef, rejecting Yosef when he needs his assistance most. When Yosef is in danger from his brothers, when he's falsely accused, when he's forgotten in prison. But when we look deeper, we may be able to see, and we in our lives are not always able to see this, but certainly in Yosef's life, when we look deeper, we are able to see that God is not forgetting us. He is placing us where we need to be so that we can accomplish what we are meant to accomplish. And when does Yosef learn this lesson? He learns this lesson at the moment he hears Paro's dreams. Yosef hears Paro's dreams. Excuse me. Sorry. Yosef hears Paro's dreams. There are 7 fat cows. There are 7 skinny cows. There are 7 fat stalks of grain, 7 blighted stalks of grain. Yosef tells Paro about the 7 years of plenty followed by the 7 years of famine. That's the interpretation of the dream. And then Yosef says the most amazing thing. After he interprets the dream of what's going to happen, then Yosef adds, V'ata yere Paro ish navon v'chacham, and now you, Paro, should appoint someone who is wise to oversee this project in order to be able to have everybody grow their crops during the 7 years of plenty and pay a tax that will go into a central storage facility. And this way, when the years of famine come, you'll be able to release this so that the people will be able to eat. And this plan found favor in Paro's eyes. Vayomer Paro avodav, and Paro says to his servants, Hanimsa kazeh ish asher ruach Elokim bo, are we going to find anybody else who has the Spirit of God in him, who's going to be able to carry out this plan? You, Yosef, you're going to be the one. You're second in command. Vata tiel basi. You will be in charge of this entire project. Val picha yishak kolami. And based on your leadership, the entire empire will be able to survive the 7 years of famine. Now, it seems ridiculous because what in Yosef's life qualified him to be the master over all of Egypt's food and second in command of the leading world power at the time? Remember, up until the age of 17, Yosef was a privileged, coddled teenager. Then he was a slave. And then he was a prisoner. So how in the world does Yosef come up with a plan like this? And you should know, we've discussed this before, up until today, professional economists debate the merits of Yosef's plan. They're professionals. What gave Yosef the crazy idea that he could come up with a plan to save Egypt and that he would be the one to execute it? So here's the key. What gave Yosef this confidence, this sense of mission, could not have happened 2 years earlier. Because it was Yosef hearing Paro's dreams and realizing that they were not only Paro's dreams, they were his own dreams from when he was 17 years old. Remember what we read at the beginning of last week's Torah portion, where Yosef has these dreams. Bailey Newman points out that just as Paro dreamt of grain, Yosef dreamt of grain, sheaves of grain. And Yosef in last week's Torah portion had a dream as a 17-year-old about what the sheaves of grain bowing down to one sheaf of grain. What is that about? Well, it's about power through food, right? It's about expressing, the idea is that Yosef would have power through food, sheaves of grain. And now, incredibly, all of a sudden, Yosef is being presented with the opportunity to enact both his own and Paro's dreams. He can enact Paro's dreams, and he can enact his own dreams. And that is why he knew he had to take the risk. He had to come up with a plan. He had to say, I can do it. Because it was the message of his own dream that was the same as the message of Paro's dream. Because at that moment, when he was brought out at the end of 2 years, again, had he left prison earlier, none of this would have happened. But because he left prison, just at the moment to hear Paro's dreams, realizing it's the same dream that he had, he realized at that moment that he was being entrusted with a mission from God. And that those 2 years, those extra 2 years, were necessary to the plan, because otherwise he would not have seen it. He would not have known about this mission. And of course, then he could not have done it. He would not have had the opportunity that God and Paro gave him. But he was kept an extra 2 years. And he did see that the 2 years were not a punishment, but a way for God to place him in the place that he needed to be for his mission. And so Yosef teaches us what God taught Yaakov that we discussed yesterday. That the purpose of life is not to live a life of shalva, of calm and comfort and ease. The purpose is to embrace the uncertainty and the challenges, because the purpose of life is for us to grow from those experiences and to find our unique mission from those experiences. Every one of us faces this test individually in our lives, and at times like now, collectively as a nation. Why can't we just live in peace? Why must there be these difficulties? I'm not a prophet. I don't have any answers to this question. But I understand from Yosef, and I understand from what God taught Yaakov, that there will be some way in which we are able to grow as a result of what we're going through right now, that will lead us to what is our true mission in life. Yosef teaches us how to look at the things that happen in life. And our Torah portion holds the key to navigating through these roiling waters in which we find ourselves. It's not an aberration to have problems. It's the purpose of life to bring us to what our mission really is. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.